Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be going into the in-depth analysis and review of the Apple Watch Series 4. It's going to be very difficult for me to find anything bad to say about it, but for those of you who are debating whether or not the Series 4 is worth it to you, to me, it absolutely is, and I think Apple absolutely nailed it this year. So, let's begin. So originally, the Apple Watch, I think, took its role as more of an accessory to the iPhone, and in many ways, it still is. I still don't see it as its own independent product. Obviously, you need an iPhone for it to work. You can't even pair it to an Android, but I don't think that was the idea Apple was going for. I think what they've got with the Apple Watch that separates it from every other product in the ecosystem is that now, thanks to the fact that we have a device that is constantly on us and can tell whenever it leaves us, that makes security and it means the potential of what the Apple Watch can allow for in the future is much, much greater than if it was just a simple add-on, a simple accessory for those people who wanted more. As it becomes typical for you to have the Apple Watch on every single day, you'll find it harder and harder to switch to anything that doesn't support it. In other words, it's another pivotal point in the ecosystem that I think is much, much stronger than some software exclusives we may talk about. Between iMessage and AirDrop, all those things are cool, but the fact that the Apple Watch is there reliably in each day, walking you through your notifications, walking you through your activity management, and it's able to do that for up to 2 days with its built-in battery life, I think that makes it much, much harder to find something else that can rival what the Apple Watch has been able to build for itself, its reputation, and I easily see why it's become the #1 watch in the world. So function-wise, there's not a whole lot that Apple changed between the Series 3 and the Series 4. This was definitely more of a design upgrade, given that we've basically had the exact same screen size and screen quality since the Series 0, the first generation Apple Watch, which, you know, for a lot of people was just fine. It wasn't really that bad. watchOS did their best to kind of black out the bezels so that that line between where the screen started and the screen ended was not so drastic. And even in watchOS 5, they do a pretty good job of trying to hide all that so that you're not really noticing the bezel. You're not really noticing that there's space between the edge of the watch and the screen. Everything just kind of blends together very nicely. But Apple wanted to take this a step further because display technology has definitely been taking off, and the market has shown its interest in rounded corners in OLED displays and how thin you can get bezels possibly. So finally, the fact that there's a company giving that same treatment to the wearable department, I'm actually really thankful for, let alone the operating system. Just think of how many wearables out there have applied this same new display technology to get the screen into every corner they can. Some watches have done pretty good jobs. They've gotten the rounded displays down. They've got bezels thinner, but Samsung makes you put up with these big gear things on the side and having lots of tick marks there no matter what, and I just don't see it as practical. It's definitely a fashion choice. It's a design trend some people are into, but I find the Apple Watch to be much more universal in terms of what fashion trend someone may be going for. Maybe they want their watch to look more normal, so they have the old-fashioned hour hand, minute hand, second hand. And in that case, having the round display for that watch interface makes a bit more sense, but for the people out there who are using their watch to read text messages and get a lot of data out of it and be reading a lot of things on their watch because it's delivering them notifications all the time, being able to support both methods of round and square are much more helpful and practical. That's what I think the Apple Watch got right. And the curved corners on the Series 4, I think they definitely tested with users. They made sure that they curved it just enough so that it aesthetically fit the look of the watch and it still looked like an iconic Apple Watch design, but just highlighted on the strengths of the previous generation. So they said, okay, this is what people like. Let's run with that. Let's highlight that. Let's make that even better than it currently is. Because I personally feel like that with completely round circular smartwatches, you cut off a little bit too much data because you're running out of room that you can fully display a sentence end to end or just a line of text from side to side, because so much of that display is focused on being curved, which may look good for a watch face, but smartwatches do a lot more than tell time, and that's the benefit to making sure that your watch stays mostly square. But as we know, that can make things look a little dull, a little boring, and that's where the Series 4 comes in and is able to say, no, here's how you make it functional but aesthetically natural simultaneously. Not really to a distracting point, but there's only a couple of times I've been reading a text and those curved corners have slightly cut off text a little bit, and I start to notice it and say, wait a minute, that wasn't a problem before because I used to have a perfectly square display and now I don't. But I think that slight con of occasionally the round corners cutting off a little bit more information is acceptable because of how much larger the display is from the previous generation. As I've said before, the marketing on both the packaging and in the commercials, they do not do justice for how small the bezels actually are on the Apple Watch. I don't know if it's something to do with the fact that the Apple Watch looks bigger in websites or in commercials and stuff like that. It just looks like a larger device. But in person, it's actually a lot smaller than a lot of people realize, and I think that means that the bezels look a lot bigger on screen than they do in person. When you actually start using them, you feel that line between the display and the stainless steel slowly getting smaller, and that just makes the experience overall more immersive. Even though we're talking about a display that literally sits on your wrist, it's just kind of hanging there, and yet it feels way larger than ever before, and that's probably because I'm so used to the old Apple Watch display. I've been a 42mm guy ever since day one that the Apple Watch Sport, which is what they called it back then, first came out, and I was a fan of it. I thought the display was perfect, but ever since the beginning, I always thought to myself, you know, I could take a larger form factor. I wish they made a third size option that was like extra large or whatever, but this is actually much better, because I think when the Apple Watch first came out, a lot of people were surprised at the smaller 38mm size. They thought it was a certain size, then they tried it on and realized how tiny it was, and at first the market wasn't entirely okay with it, and I think the 42mm was the way to go. But as time went on, some people realized that you don't want this giant hunk of metal hanging off your arm, and the 38mm became more appealing to more and more people as time went on, and 42 I think became like the standard maximum for what a smartwatch size should be. If you're making watches bigger than that, it's getting a little clunky, it's getting a little too overbearing, but I typically like bigger displays or bigger forms of technology. If I'm able to see more content out of it, I think it's worth it in the long run for me, but this is the perfect compromise of meeting in the middle, because it's so much better to keep your same form factor and also support your old Apple Watch bands, but still expand on that display. So I'm totally grateful that Apple took the route of, we want a bigger display, so let's shrink the bezels and not just make a bigger watch and have people buy new watch bands all over again. If Apple would have done that, I probably would have been very tempted to upgrade myself to the larger form factor, but they didn't, which I'm very thankful for, and I feel like a Steve Jobs era Apple would have been okay with charging everyone extra for buying all new watch bands, but the new crew and the new people who are in charge of Apple right now seem to be in favor of making things efficient and not buying new things every single year if you don't want to, because they support the longevity of new iPhones and making sure they last a long time. And I'm sure that applies to the Apple Watches as well. To a certain point, of course, sadly, watchOS 5 is not available on the OG Apple Watch, but you gotta remember what they were dealing with CPU-wise back then, and there are still people using their first generation Apple Watches, and for most people they're working okay, but for a lot of people that battery health is degrading, it's starting to show its age. But this CPU from the beginning was always pretty slow, and luckily with the Apple Watch Series 4 they're upping it to 64-bit. This S4 chip is making things really snappy and making things like Siri respond incredibly fast, making apps open very quickly, and especially the first time you unbox the Apple Watch and start pairing it with your iPhone. I remember for the last couple Apple Watches I unboxed, that used to be quite a lengthy process. With the Series 4, I think it took like 10 minutes. It was just say which wrist you're on and say where you like the digital crown, and boom, starts installing apps, and it's done usually pretty quickly. I appreciate that we're finally getting it to a point where the Series 4 is able to have a CPU that I can tell is likely going to support many future iterations of watchOS, so that if you haven't bought an Apple Watch yet, or if you haven't upgraded in a long time, the Series 4 seems like the perfect time to upgrade, because you're getting this new design change. It's extremely noticeable. It's giving people a new watch band standard, so it'll be easier to remember the 40mm and 44mm nowadays. That should be the norm for the next few years easily, and honestly, I can't think of much else they could add in this Series 5. It's going to be very difficult for Apple to upgrade the Series 4 even further than they already have. Like, honestly, what could they come up with? I guess maybe micro LED technology they could start embedding into the Apple Watch, and then bezels could get even thinner. Battery life could get even better. There's definitely improvements that you can always make on any product, like battery life or thinner bezels, or how affordable you can make it. Hopefully next year they can make the Series 4 much more obtainable for more people. But in terms of function and in terms of design, I'm sure that the Apple Watch is kind of hitting a wall this year with, wow, this is getting near perfection. How could they make this any better? And I'm sure Apple's asking themselves right now, yeah, how can we make this any better? How can we justify an entire number upgrade from 4 4 to 5 and have it actually be worth it to a large number of people, that's got to be a tricky job, and I'm glad it's not mine because I probably could not come up with anything that they're gonna think of. I also think it's great that there's new watch faces this year that are fully taking advantage of all of the new display real estate that we're working with. So we've got way more complications that you can add than before. In fact, with the new infograph watch face, I feel like they were intentionally trying to go over the top with, you can literally put as much things as you want on the Apple Watch display and we will not stop you. Do you want to know where the freaking moon is right now? Do you want to know where Earth is? We got complications for that because honestly, it feels like they wanted to just display every single complication at the same time. And honestly, this is a good problem to have. And I'm okay with the fact that a lot of people are like, that infograph watch face is way too complicated. It's way too crazy. I would never use that because you don't have to. And I honestly feel like it was just a marketing tactic to just be like, this is how much stuff we can fit on the display. Very, very obviously, they could not fit that on the screen of previous generation watches. So it's great that with that new display size and resolution on the Series 4s, they're showing off what you can do with it with these new watch faces. I know from the very beginning we used to complain about how third-party watch faces need to be a thing, but honestly, the amount of customization Apple gives you with watchOS is very not Apple. Typically, Apple's pretty locked down about what people use, and so many different options between the fire and the water and the time lapses and the photo albums that I'm sure third parties could make some pretty interesting watch faces, but I don't feel like we're missing out on much because there's kind of a watch face for everyone. There's playful ones, there's functional ones, there's basic ones, and like I said, all of them have so many different tweaks you can make between colors and complications. I'm so grateful that Apple actually really went crazy with the settings app on the Series 4 and made sure that you had plenty of different things to choose from. In the Series 4, once again, just highlights on that. And speaking of things that Apple knows they do well and pursues to take to the next level is the Taptic Engine, which I think is drastically improved with the Series 4, especially with the mechanical feel now that you get with the digital crown. So before, the digital crown was cool and it was functional. I think it makes sense that there is a way to scroll or move around on the device without having your finger to cover up the screen because you have very limited screen real estate to work with. But now that they give you that slight taptic feedback whenever you're scrolling the digital crown, makes the experience feel much more natural, much more mechanical, and you can still turn it off if you need to. So it's not required, but I think it's amazing that they're able to fit such a Taptic Engine in the Series 4 that you can tell the difference between scrolling taptics and a little bit different, more hard taptic when you reach the bottom of a page or you reach the top of a page. So just scrolling through your settings in the Control Center section of the app, which you get to just by swiping up, you feel the little taps while you're scrolling down, but then when you reach the bottom, it taps a little bit harder, and it's that type of attention to detail that I really love when using my Apple products. That is very notable in the Series 4. Once again, they knew what they were doing and they knew what they did right, so they were like, let's just keep going with that. So I'm loving the new taptic feedback. I'm pretty sure everyone who gets the Series 4 is going to want to leave that on because it's just satisfying and it just makes the watch feel, I don't know how to describe it exactly, just intentional. Like they knew people were going to love it. They knew people already loved the Series 3 and they were like, this is going to be good. We all like it and we know you're going to. So that's the best I can do to try to describe how they added that. And I also think we need to take a moment to say RIP to the Apple Watch Edition. That's right. Series 4 doesn't come in solid gold anymore and it doesn't come in ceramic, which surprised a lot of people because even myself was kind of debating maybe this year, if things go well, I should upgrade myself to the Edition. I should get the ceramic one. But for some reason, Apple decided, nah, let's not do that this year. Maybe it's because the Series 4 is overall more expensive than last year. I believe they rose the price overall about $50 across the board. So things that used to be $350 or used to be $370 are now $400 or $450. So it definitely got a price raise, but it's very unlike Apple for them to just say, oh, the most expensive version? I guess we don't need those anymore. Surprisingly, I knew a lot of people that were willing to spend that much on that Apple Watch, and it still looked really good. I liked trying it on in the store and everything, but it's surprising to me that they just decided, stainless steel's good enough, let's just stop it there. Because the more Apple thing to do is to offer those premium options. Maybe they're letting Hermes take over that field and say, no, if people want to spend extra money and have more exclusivity, they can buy that luxury fashion brand version with your own exclusive watch face and double tour watch bands that cost thousands of dollars. I don't get it. It's not for me. But it was just interesting to me that they decided to cancel that lineup and say, nah, we're not going to do that anymore. Maybe that's how they'll bring back the Series 5. They'll offer more expensive versions and cheaper versions. But yeah, honestly, very bizarre move for Apple. They usually would not do things like that, but they did, man. There's nothing to complain about about, okay, the average price of Apple Watches have now been lowered because they're no longer selling $1,400 versions of it. So I think that's fine. I think it's interesting that Apple has seasonal watch band releases as well. I love the assortment of watch bands that I've collected over the years, and I'm so thankful that I can keep using them with my new Series 4. And even the third-party ones you can find on certain websites can be pretty high quality for much more affordable than Apple's. So the third-party community is vastly growing there, and it's fairly high quality if you can find the right brands. Just make sure you read those reviews before you make the purchase. So I feel like the customization is endless. I feel like the software and hardware optimization is perfect. How they're able to get the iMac to unlock with your watch or your MacBook and get that security across the board, across the entire ecosystem. They nailed it. And honestly, I think this is one of my favorite Apple upgrades of all time. You know, obviously it's not as major something from like the iPhone 7 to the iPhone 10. That was a 1-year upgrade that was very substantial. But with the Apple Watch upgrading from a Series 3 to a Series 4, you can tell they're really passionate about this. They were really excited to be pushing the boundaries of the display and shrink that bezel even further. And honestly, be a device that helps a lot of people. Now with fall detection, making sure that if someone's in trouble, they can get help, and having more heart rate monitoring and making sure that if someone's heart is not behaving correctly, they're able to give them a warning so that they can get the proper help they need before things get too serious. And also with countless stories of the Apple Watch helping people lose weight and be able to be healthier and get outside and be more active. And I think the fact that Apple's been able to do all of this with one single product is pretty substantial. And I think the Apple Watch is what Apple should be most proud of post Steve Jobs era, because what they've been able to create with this experience, I think, is really going to keep people part of the ecosystem. And if you ever want to switch away from Apple, this is likely going to be the hardest thing to move away from and to stop using on a day-to-day, because Wear OS and Tizen can do some impressive things, but I guess I just don't feel the passion. I don't feel the need to go that extra mile and that need to make things just a little bit more perfect that I do when I use the Apple Watch Series 4. So if you've already got yours, I hope you're enjoying it. And I will also add that with the Apple Watch Series 4, this is the one product that when people ask me, like, should I get a Series 3, should I get a used Series 2, or should I save up for a 4? The Apple Watch is literally like the one product out there that I will always say, don't get a 3, don't get a used 2, just save for the 4, because honestly, it is worth it. If you're able to hold out a little bit longer and upgrade to this one, it's going to be so many miles ahead and so much faster and so much more optimized than what you'll get with the 3 and 2, and you'll be glad that you waited. You'll be glad that you saved for it, because upgrading to a 4 from a 3 is like night and day. It's such a drastic upgrade. It'll be super noticeable. If you haven't thought about getting one yet, I really recommend it. Obviously, when these shipping times go down, because clearly this is a very high-in-demand Apple product, and I even saw some reports saying that when these new quarter earnings come out, it sounds like the Apple Watch may have sold way past 10 million units, again, within a single quarter. So it's going to stay the king of the smartwatch game, understandably, and I think it deserves it. So let me know your guys' thoughts on the Series 4 down in the comments below, and I really hope the people who are waiting for theirs or haven't got theirs yet, really hope you guys enjoy it. So this is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.